Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacinta Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director and Events and Exhibitions Producer for the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here to the Hawke Centre and the University of South Australia. In doing so, I take this opportunity to acknowledge that the University of South Australia is on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and respect their culture, heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. Tonight, we will hear from celebrated journalist Tracey Lee Holmes as she reflects on her book, The Eye of the Dragonfly. Past memoir, part manifesto, sharing personal stories and insights into some of sport's most compelling and controversial issues. Tracey will be in conversation with fellow journalist and author Tory Shepherd, and a very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. The session tonight is being recorded and will be on our Hawke Centre website next week. I encourage you to bring this to the attention of friends and colleagues who could not join us tonight. We are also live streaming this presentation, and I warmly welcome our online audience. Hello. I also need to do a shout out to Stan. That'd be Stan Grant. Hello, Stan. We wish you were here, but never mind. He's supporting Tracey from afar, and I look forward to Stan hopefully coming back to the Hawke Centre next year. As we are filming, can I please ask you to switch your phones to silent to avoid interruptions? Tracey Lee Holmes is one of Australia's most recognised journalists, having spent almost 4 decades reporting on the world's biggest sport stories. Her work is focused on the intersection where sport meets politics, business, culture and news. Tonight, Tracey will be in conversation with Tory Shepherd. Tory is a senior reporter for Guardian Australia, a freelance writer and the author of On Freedom. So please join me in welcoming Tracey Lee Holmes and Tory Shepherd for what promises to be a compelling and insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacinta. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Tracey. And can I say, we were talking about how many people were coming tonight, and Tracey said, oh, not for me though, right? Tracey, we've got a lot to get through. I already had too many questions, and then we've got a lot of marvellous questions from the audience as well, so we're just going to plough on and see how we go. But I thought to start, I'd get you to explain to me dragonfly eyes.
Yeah, so this is interesting, and for a while I was struggling with what to call the book, and my original kind of working title was Do Not Call Me a Sports Reporter, because I was not interested in reporting scores, injuries, playlists, whatever. It was always the kind of bigger picture. And then I thought, that's a really negative title for a book. Anyway, Stan and I have got this little property at the bottom of the Snowy Mountains, halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, about an hour out of Wagga. It's called Adelong, population about 800. And as it turns out, Stan's people, the Wiradjuri people, are part of this land. And my great-great-grandfather, who was a doctor to the Chinese miners in the 1850s, actually came out from China and lived there to treat the miners who were working in the gold mine. Now, where the gold mine is these pools, rock pools, that are at the end of a creek which runs through our property. And so each day in the summer, Stan and I go walking down and go swimming in the rock pools, and whenever we're there, these incredible electric blue, like kind of this colour, dragonflies just come and hover around. They're really beautiful, and I knew nothing about dragonflies. So I went back, did some research, and found out that dragonflies are 300 million years old. They're the oldest living creature on the planet, and they have 360-degree view. And I thought, that is so perfect, because I've always tried to have a 360-degree view of the stories I tell about sport, knowing that they're not just from my side or from somebody else's side, but they're from every side and where they intersect. And so I thought, yes, I've got the name of my book.
I love that, and I love the idyllic picture you've just painted of this amazing place. Now, I know a lot of people want to know about your incredible childhood and your travels, but I think that's one of the things we're just going to have to charge through. So tell us a little bit about when you grew up.
So Mum and Dad were both surfers, and we're talking about the sort of, mid to late 60s. I was born in 66, to very young parents, I've got to say. And when I was 2, my dad heard from his older brother in South Africa. He'd gone across there to surf. And he sent a message to Dad and said, listen, the surf here is really good. You've got to come over. And my dad also made surfboards. So we hopped on a boat called the Galileo, and off we went for 17 days and ended up in South Africa. This was the time when South Africa was apartheid. So not a pleasant place for a majority of the people that live there. And so I think for my mum and dad, that was a real learning experience as well. And growing up in, at that time was also really fascinating for me. But my mum was part of a group that organised a surfing event, and it was one of the world's first professional surfing contests. It's still running today, so it's the world's longest running professional surfing event. And they invited surfers from all around the world. And obviously, some of those surfers that came in were not white. So some of the Hawaiians that came in, they were black, but in their passport, they had stamped honorary white visa. Yeah, exactly. So, but what's stamped in your passport didn't get you access to the hotels where everybody else was staying, or the cafes where everybody else was eating, or even some of the beaches where everybody else was surfing. So it was pretty difficult for them. So my mum said to all of these people, oh, just forget about all of that, just come and stay with us in our house. So every night in our house was like the United Nations. There was music, conversations, accents. I was hearing stories I'd never heard before. So it was a really great introduction to the world, actually. And so just jumping forward a few years, when these surfers went back to Hawaii, their parents wrote to my parents and said, our sons would not have survived without you, so you have to let us return the favour. Please come and visit us. Well, that was all the invitation my father needed. We packed up all the belongings that we didn't have and went to Hawaii. And the Hawaiian family, we had no idea that they're one of the most legendary families in Hawaii. Surf family, absolute incredible water people, rescued thousands and thousands of tourists over many years who get swept away in the big waves. And they were caretakers of an old Chinese graveyard, which meant we were living at the bottom of an old Chinese graveyard. So I spent some of my childhood there, and I just used to walk across a little bridge to go to school. It was fabulous. And then we ended up coming back to Australia. And now I'm here. And I'm just so impressed there's so many people here. Thank you. And hello to everyone online, including my husband.
Oh, that's so great. For those who haven't read the book, it's this extraordinary, there's a collection of amazing anecdotes. I mean, we've barely brushed on any of them. And then there are the themes running through it, which is about sport as both people, politics, and power and psychology. So maybe if we just delve deeply into one of those anecdotes, because I don't think this is necessarily something that people know about, your role in extricating athletes from Afghanistan after the Allies had moved out.
Yeah, so this was interesting because my husband, having been a senior correspondent for CNN for 14 years, had spent a lot of those 14 years in some of the worst places in the world, and every war zone that was happening and every catastrophe that took place, my husband was sent there. So we didn't see him a lot, and this is while we're living in Hong Kong, Beijing, the Middle East, back to Beijing over a period of many, many years. And my husband said to me before I went to the Tokyo Olympics, and that was during COVID, remember? So I had to get permission to leave the country, cover the Tokyo Olympics, which was so extraordinary, just given that there were no crowds. It was an incredible event. And then get permission to come back into the country. And my husband let me know about 3 or 4 days before I flew home. He said, just watch what's happening in Afghanistan because the Taliban's getting closer and closer. And the minute they get to Kabul, it's going to be mayhem. So I was watching, and I'd been back about 48 hours sitting in my little hotel room for 2 weeks. And that's what happened. The Taliban rode in. And I remember having numbers ready at the ready, former Afghan athletes, women who had fled the country during the previous time that the Taliban had been in control. And so I started ringing them and saying, okay, tell me what's happening now. What are the women athletes in Afghanistan thinking now? And their stories and their voice, and it would give you chills hearing them talking about the devastation and the pain that they were feeling for every female that was stuck inside Afghanistan. So as I got the interviews, I'd send them through to the ABC and they were putting them on air, and then I did a 1 hour sort of compilation. And about halfway through this 1 hour, a friend of mine, Nikki Dryden, who is an Olympic swimmer, she used to compete for Canada, she lives in Australia, and she's a human rights lawyer. And she rang me up and she was in tears. And she said, we've got to do something. What are we going to do? We've got to help these women get out. So she then teamed up with another couple of people, and that kind of family grew. There were people like Craig Foster from football. There was Zali Steggall, the parliamentarian who was an Olympic skier. A whole lot of people just started pressuring the government, we've got to help these women. And then I started getting calls all through the night from women saying, help me, please help me. And I'd pass those numbers on to people who could try and fill out paperwork and get emergency visas for them. And in the end, we got them there. They got on the last flights out, not just Australian flights. I think Canada was there. There was the Air Force from France, whatever planes they could get on. We just got as many through as we could, and it wasn't easy. It was a 24/7 thing that just went for that short period of time, maybe 4 or 5 days, and 145 of them got out. But the story continued afterwards because we would still keep hearing from people. And so one of the teams that got out afterwards was the cricket team, who now lives in Melbourne. And again, Catherine Ordway, who is a professor, got in touch with me and said, how did you get those people out? I said, Catherine, I can't do it again. It was so sort of tense, but you do it, you go for it, please, you go for it. And she did, and she kind of, got together with a few other people and got the cricket team out through a different means much later across the border into Pakistan and then eventually to Australia. But those women and those athletes, I will say this, I'm sure, till the day I die, I have never met tougher, more resilient people than these women from Afghanistan. They are amazing. And every time they play today, they do it not just for themselves and for the team that's here, they do it for all of the girls and the future of the women of Afghanistan. They're really incredible.
Amazing. Did you reflect at the time on how a lot of the time journalists are meant to sit outside, be impartial, passive observers? I know there was that famous conversation about that great photo of the starving child with the vulture approaching that somebody took, and people said, well, he should have saved the child. It kicked off this still going conversation about journos intervening. Did you have to think about that, or it was just, we got to save these ladies?
Well, yeah, it was just, you've got to do what you've got to do, and sometimes you stop being a journalist and you start trying to help people. And so, most times in doing my work, you have the benefit, I suppose, of being able to sit back, and I do think that I'm very much an observer, and I try not to put myself into the situation. I like to observe what's happening, because most times you're talking about stories that don't involve you at all. And I don't like being the centre of a story either, because, I really, even in my own life, I feel sometimes like I'm standing back there somewhere just looking in and watching it happen. But at moments like that, it becomes more than journalism. So it was important to document their stories, which is what I was still doing, and I still do today. I'm still in touch with quite a few of them. But also to do whatever you could to help, because you knew that the alternative was devastation, and you can't sit by and watch that. And if that meant I had to stop telling stories to be able to do that part, then most definitely I would do that.
Amazing. And you'll do that without panicking. So you wrote that you are an extraordinarily calm person, to the point that it infuriates your mother.
It infuriates lots of people. It infuriates lots of people I work with, because everyone will be going like that. And I just go pretty calm, and they're like, what is wrong with you? It's like, no, nothing. And I think someone explained it to me once, and I don't even know if this is a thing. I've never looked it up. But they said it's called anti-adrenaline syndrome. And so the minute everyone else, the adrenaline starts rising, I just kind of go, oh, I could probably just go to sleep. I get very calm. But I think that's good, because it's good to have someone like that whenever, you know, the shit is hitting the fan. I can still think quite calmly, and I can kind of strategise about what we should be doing and how we get out of this mess. So it has its benefits.
Yeah, and I think sometimes journalists, it's a sort of a sense of self-importance, like I'm at the centre of all these events that are going on and therefore I'm panicking, but I'm also performing my panic because it shows that I'm critical at this particular time. Did you also study some Buddhism? Did that help?
Yeah, I think it didn't help because I was always like that, but it helped in other ways. So I just think, I remember from a very young age, I think I just thought like a Buddhist, which is a really weird thing to say, but I remember, you know, my mum came into my room one day when I was about 4 in South Africa, and I was standing in the corner. And my mum never ever, she wasn't one of those parents that go and stand in the corner. She'd never said that. I must have heard it from someone at school. When someone was bad, they had to go and stand in the corner. So I was standing in the corner, and my mum walked into the room and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've been really bad and I'm standing in the corner." And she said, "What have you done?" I said, "I know when I was walking today, I trod on ants." And I think she just thought from that moment, this child is weird. Anyway, I just thought, no, I think it's probably that I think like a Buddhist. So there's a very funny story. When we lived in Hong Kong, one of my favourite films is called The Cup. And it was made in a Bhutanese monastery, and about these boys who were in the monastery who had to go down and buy the goods at the local store and take them back to the monastery every day. But when they got down to the store, there was a Pakistani man who ran it, and he had a satellite dish on the back of a truck, and he was watching this thing called the World Cup. And because these boys were going every day, and it was the FIFA World Cup in France, which I'd covered, but as they went down every day, they sort of got more and more engaged, and they went back and they said to the abbot at one point, "The man at the shop told us that the final is on Sunday. Could we rent a television and watch the final on Sunday?" Anyway, the abbot said yes. He had no idea what they were talking about. And all the young monks were sitting in the square and they were beaming the final of the World Cup. And it was just such a great story, such a great film. And the guy that made it was a Buddhist monk. Stan came home from work one day at CNN and he said, "You won't believe it, I just interviewed that monk that made the film." And I'm like, "Oh, you should have called me. I would have come in. It would have been great. I would have loved to have met him." 3 days later, we're driving out of our little village, and here was this monk walking up the hill. And Stan said, "That's him, that's him." So we pulled over. I jumped out of the car. I ran over. I shook his hand. Probably disrespectful. I said, I just really love your film. It's so fantastic. My favourite film. Well done. It was beautifully told and shot." And he said, "Thank you so much. Thank you." "What film?" I said, "The Cup." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Are you the guy from Bhutan who made the film The Cup?" No. He was a completely different Buddhist monk. But we stood on the side of the road talking for about half an hour, and then he went on his way, we went on our way. And about a week later, I was at the kitchen sink, and I swear, I've only stood at a kitchen sink about 6 times in my life. And I was at the kitchen sink looking out, and all of a sudden, this figure loomed up, and it was the monk. And he'd been bending down, patting the cats we had that were sunbaking in the sun.
Wait, the actual monk?
The actual monk. No, the monk that we'd spoken to 4 days earlier. And we both went, "Well, what are you doing there?" And he said, "I think I'd better come in. I think we're supposed to, really form a friendship here." So he came into the house, and one thing led to another, and I started going to his classes. Then I took Buddhist vows, and now I'm a Buddhist.
You are so many things. The other thing you're doing is a Masters of Sport Diplomacy. Can we tie that back into the World Cup? What kind of responsibility? I mean, I think of the World Cup as a great, unifier. And I guess there's a question there about how much events like that should be doing in terms of human rights and bringing people together, or whether they just continue to be a great sporting competition. Can you tell us a bit about your masters? Like, what do you look at there? And then how you think things like the World Cup should act in terms of, unifying humanity, for lack of a better phrase.
I mean, that's the sort of eternal question, isn't it? We want peace. We want humanity to be unified. And so how do we do that when we all come from such different perspectives? We all have such different life experiences. We have different countries with different histories and different families and different ideologies. So how we expect one day that we're all going to live happily ever after is kind of, it's out there somewhere. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. And so this master's I'm doing is of international sports diplomacy, which is being offered by the Hungarian University of Sports Science. And I know a lot of Aussies go, oh, right, sports diplomacy, international diplomacy in Hungary. It's like, yes, actually, they're doing it. We're not. And so I've just come back from Hungary. I was over there for a week for an intensive, and it's really fascinating to see what they're doing with sport. And sort of, during the Cold War and through the Soviet era, they were one of the satellite countries that kind of benefited from that system, socialism, communism, and sport was front and centre. And then it kind of dissipated for a while, but they're a really strong sporting nation. And a friend of mine who's a former Olympic bobsledder actually sent me a message when he heard I was there, and he said, you do know Hungary has won more Olympic medals than any other country not to have hosted the Olympic Games. And they've tried to host the Olympic Games 6 times. They've put forward a bid and haven't made it. But under the Orban government, and we know what they represent, but there's a real push again to put sport front and centre. And there's a lot of very young people, really dynamic people working in the sector for smaller events. So there's a number of international federations which are moving into Budapest, moving out of Switzerland and other places where they've traditionally been, because it's too expensive now, there's too much bureaucracy, it's very difficult for some nationalities to get in and out. And they've tried to sort of make a bespoke kind of, they've got a sports act, which makes it more friendly for sports international bodies to move there, be there. You can get employees who are really keen on sport and have studied sport in various degrees at university, who want to work in the sports sector but haven't had the opportunity. So it's kind of refashioning itself around sport, tourism, the whole bit. So it was fascinating to see that. But to get back to your question about, how that plays into sport and what sports can and can't do, they can't solve the world's problems. Sport cannot do that. But I still maintain, I say this to so many people, there's only one place in the world where you can come from any country and be sitting in the dining hall and the person opposite you is from North Korea. And the only place that can happen is either in the Olympic Village or at a FIFA World Cup if they have qualified. And so that is what sport offers. And it doesn't mean those people in that room are going to solve anything. But, I believe in the ripple effect that works outwards. And once you can start having those conversations with people, or establishing relationships, or just getting to understand a little bit about people that come from somewhere so extraordinarily different to the experiences I've had, and likewise for them, that's how you start to make the world a better place. I mean, we've probably all heard the story from someone, and, when people say, oh, I'm not racist, but, and then they'll tell you a story, and then you might mention to them, oh, but I thought so-and-so was your friend. And they go, oh yeah, but they're not like the rest of them. Actually, what we know is that they are exactly like the rest of them. It's just that you've built a personal relationship, and so that softens all those hard edges. And I think we need to do that a little bit more, and through sport, we can do that. And I just really wish that our government in Australia, whichever government it is, Liberal, Labor, coalition, whatever, I really wish that we made more of the huge role that our athletes and all of our sports administrators and people that work in the sports industry, there are Australians everywhere in the world working in it. And I'm going to make it my ambition, I think, next to establish this Sports Ambassadors Network, because they're all out there. And I just think we can do a whole lot more if the government sort of harnesses that.
So is that what might come out of your masters? That's
Yeah.
sort of role?
Yeah,
Great.
exactly.
And how do you set that up?
With great difficulty, I'm finding out. I don't know if DFAT is terribly interested in building those sorts of relationships, which I think is a shame.
Surely it comes under soft power.
Well, it is soft power. It's massive soft power. But I think what happens is, and I think, you know, in many other places, I don't think they see sport as separate to the rest of life. And I think in Australia, we still have that a bit. It's sort of like a silo over here, and it all happens there, but it's not connected to anything else. It's amazing how many people have said to me sort of over, you know, the decades that I've been doing this job, oh, look, I don't even like sport, but I really like the stories you tell. And it's like, yeah, but they're sport stories. So then you do like sport, actually. And I think there's kind of this disconnect. And I think Australia, one of the things I've realised being in and out of the country a lot is that we do kind of silo things. You know, we keep that very separate to that. And I think if we can just bring that together a bit, because if you go to anywhere in the Middle East, if you go to anywhere in China, Africa now, South America, everywhere, the whole conversation about society and politics, domestic politics, international politics, it's all woven in around the football club or the cricket club, or it all just happens as part of the same mosaic. And I don't think we have tapped into that and realised, you know, what a great tool we have with all of our athletes and sports administrators and other people that work in the sports industry, and Australians generally that live overseas and have tapped into the sports, you know, locality.
Yeah, why haven't we? Why have we siloed it? Yeah, no, I was just trying to think, is it that we put our players up on pedestals and so they're a step removed, but we're not the only ones who do that?
Oh, look, I think it's probably more that we're very isolated. You know, even though we've got people here from pretty much every country on the planet, we don't share land borders with anyone. And so it's easy for us just to keep looking inward. And even though we're very in touch with the news that's happening everywhere else, it's everywhere else. And so I don't think we realise how important those links can be. But if you go back to the Afghanistan story, you know, my friends that work in human rights or at universities in sport or integrity departments around the place, the contacts that we all have all around the world, that's what enables you to solve a problem. You can pick up a phone to somebody who is doing that or is there or can find a solution. Or, you know, one of the people I didn't mention but I should have is a guy called Neil Fergus. And I met him when I worked for the Sydney Olympic Organising Committee, and he was in charge of security. And he's worked on pretty much every Olympic Games that there's been in living memory, looking after security for the Australian team when they travel. Sometimes he does security for overseas-based bids and what have you. And he's just tapped into, you know, the Australian military, all of our forces. And at one point when we got these girls into the moat around the airport and they couldn't get any further, I phoned Neil. Neil, do you know anyone from the Australian military that is inside the airport? And he's like, I do, give me a minute, I'll be back in touch. And so it was actually Neil that helped get them basically over the wall and onto the planes. So, I mean, that's a vast, influential network, and we could use it to do so much in the region. Instead of, you know, always thinking about repelling certain countries and making sure they don't get any closer to Oceania, like, why don't we find ways of having better discussions, you know, and rather than sort of marching into some of these other countries and saying, we'll give you this, but it means you've got to do that, and sever ties with them. Like, we can't compete with them, you know, being a very big China that does a lot of work with soft power, with sport. And so we need to kind of match that. We need to find a way of being able to utilise all the great skills that we have.
Great. Now, I don't think I realised that China was doing a lot in sport. Is that things like building sporting facilities in the Pacific, as Belt and Road, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've tried to... Were we stepping up or stepping down to that? I can't remember. Stepping up.
Stepping up, but I would say in not a terribly friendly way. Yeah. You know, I think, and there's horses for courses, to use an old cliche, but, you know, there are times when you take a much harder line, and there are times when you actually benefit by taking a softer approach or an approach of, you know, conciliation. I'll give you an example. So when I came back from the Beijing Winter Olympics, which was in 22, and again, it was a COVID Olympics, and it was interesting how many of the athletes said, you know, because they kept travelling during COVID under all sorts of differing conditions in different countries, but the Australian team said they had never felt more safe in a COVID country than they had felt in China, and the facilities for the Winter Olympics were incredible. There was nothing that they needed or wanted. It was there for them. They were looked after. They just thought it was incredible because they'd been competing for a couple of years under these sorts of conditions, and it was really trying. Anyway, when I got back from the Olympics, I got a call from the Chinese embassy, and as you might remember, it kind of coincided with the time when the Chinese decided it was time to try and repair the relationship that China and Australia had, because it was just going down. It wasn't really, and it was just like, where do you go? If you're going down, how far down do you go before you say, okay, we might need a different strategy here? So a new ambassador was sent to Australia, and he had been so terrific in kind of trying to open up conversations. Anyway, he organised an invitation with some of the people from the Australian Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee, some of the athletes who had been in Beijing competing, and he invited them to his residence as a welcome home to your country, but thank you for coming to ours. And it was just a lovely day. It was a lunch. There was no propaganda lessons. You know, it was not like that at all. It really was what he said, invited them to come in and know that there are parts of our relationship that we can have here as well. It doesn't stop when you leave the Winter Olympics. And the reaction from the Olympic officials and the athletes who were in the room was so incredible. And I don't want to give away all my secrets, but I thought, I'm going to take that plan, and when I have to devise my own project for this International Sports Diplomacy Masters, I'm going to use that example, because imagine all the embassies that we have around the world and what could be done, you know, using exactly the same sort of strategy. I think it's got amazing potential.
I think you'll definitely pip Trump to the Nobel Peace Prize with that.
There's a lot of people in sport lining up for the Nobel Peace Prize, and they still haven't got it.
Dang. Now, I was going to move on to the ABC, but while we're on China, I might just go from the macro to the micro. Tell us about finding out about your Chinese ancestry.
Yeah, that was funny because it was really odd, actually. I remember whenever we flew back to Beijing, because we lived in Hong Kong for 4 years, we lived in a little fishing village, which was just incredible at the bottom of the national park. If any of you know it, it's called Shek O. Does anyone know Shek O? And basically, if you go you follow the windy road round to Stanley, people don't realise you can turn off into the national park and go all the way down. There's this little tiny fishing village, and that's where we lived. I'll just backtrack a bit too, because I know Stan's watching. So when we first got to Hong Kong, CNN put us up, and we had an apartment there, which was fine, but apartment living is not for me. And we had, you know, young kids and the whole thing. Stan was always away working, and I always used to send the kids to school. Jesse was 6 weeks old when we left. He's our youngest. So I'd strap him on and I'd go exploring. So I'd go walking through little villages or catching the bus, and I caught the bus down to this little village. And this place is great. So nearly every weekend we were heading back there to go to the beach, to swim. It was terrific. So Stan said, why don't you, next week, look for a place that we can rent here and we'll move to the village? And I'm like, oh, yes, fantastic. So the next weekend we head down to the village, and basically the village has one road in and a roundabout that heads back out. And you can go up to the headland, and there's some houses there, or there's some houses along the beach, and there's a whole lot of little alleyways with little Chinese houses. Anyway, so Stan said, have you organised to meet like a real estate agent or something? And it's like, no, this is a village. There's no ATM. There's no real estate. There's no police. There's no nothing. It's just a little tiny Chinese village. So he said, how the hell are we going to get a house? I said, well, I just thought if we stood on the roundabout, Stan's eyes are rolling. I said, someone will come along. You know, this is the relaxed, Buddhist me. And he's like, oh my God, you are mad, you're infuriating. So we're standing on the roundabout with two little kids and a third one on a pouch, and Stan freaking out and me going, it's okay, someone will come along. Anyway, this Chinese guy comes along, grey hair, ponytail, and he says, Stan. And Stan goes, Joe, what are you doing here? Joe says, I live here. What are you doing here? Oh, my wife's got this pea-brained idea that if we stand on the roundabout, someone will rent us a house. And he said, my cousin owns most of them. There's about 6 available at the moment. Come and I'll show you. You can take your pick.
Unbelievable. I'm not sure who's proven right in that situation then. I think you are. Be calm and it'll happen.
If we're doing who's right and wrong in our relationship over the last 25, 26 years or so, Stan is about 99% ahead of me. Okay, so that was one of the rare occasions when I was right.
And we might come back to your relationship as well. But I wanted to go to the ABC. I love this paragraph in your book. There'll always be a bloke who presumes he knows how to do things better than the females in the room. I think that's a universal experience.
No, it's not in China.
Oh.
We can come back to that, yeah.
So tell us about your time at the ABC, because also I love that bolshy tale you tell of like, I've come up with a 15-minute program. Here it is, let's do this one, bypassing all normal procedures. You went, you left, went again, left again?
Yeah, I've come and gone 3 times from the ABC. And even when I talk about the ABC, I still say we, even though the last time I left was in 2023. So I've got to try and get it out of my system. But I'm pretty sure that at some stage I might end up back there. Who knows?
Who knows? So we won't be too nasty about them because we don't want to burn that bridge. How has it changed over all that time in terms of, sport, very heavily male dominated, that has changed? Even just that, those interactions like that inside the ABC, has it got better?
Oh, look, miles better. And it's interesting when I hear some of the younger women coming through now saying, oh, it's so hard. And I think, yeah, it is, but not compared to what it was. And so I remember when, I was so fortunate when I started at the ABC as a trainee. That was in 1989. And in 1992, they decided they would make me the first female host of Grandstand. So I then became the first female host of any national sports show in the country. And we got a lot of male, M-A-L-E, M-A-I-L.
Did you get a lot of feedback on your performance?
Yeah. Like, well, who's going to listen to a woman talking about sport? All they do is laugh. They've got no idea about sport. And like in so many ways, that's true. Like, I really don't know the rules of every sport. I don't, and I don't care. The parts of sport that I really like are what it tells you, even when 2 teams are playing a game, it's telling you something about the countries they are representing or the clubs they're representing and the communities they come from. And there are great stories that go around that. So that's always been my fascination. And what we found, all of these people that said, that's it, they'd never listen to ABC Sport again, how could they, it'll just be terrible. Actually, most of them stayed. And on top of that, we then got a whole new audience of people that hadn't traditionally been sports listeners because they were hearing stories that were quite different. And I purposely tried to tell stories that were very different based on my interests, very selfishly. So I was working with all men, and they were fabulous. They were really fabulous. Everything I learnt from them. So I can't say that, I had a terrible time, because I really didn't. But that particular incident was when, a long time ago, you had to tape edit. You had these reel-to-reels and you'd record your interview on the reel-to-reel, and if you had to edit anything out, you had to use a little razor and a pencil, and I loved it.
Literally cut and paste.
Finicky bit, yeah. And you'd put it together and put a little bit of tape over and hope that it held together so the interview played properly. And I'd been doing this for some time and I was really good at it. I was really fast. Anyway, this new guy started, and this guy actually really liked having a long lunch, but his lunch started at morning tea, and he'd have a couple of beers at morning tea, and stumble back in about 1 o'clock. He didn't last very long within the organisation, I've got to say. But he came back after lunch one day and he said, "Listen, I thought I'd teach you how to tape edit this afternoon." I'm like, "Mate, I could beat you in any tape editing competition, but okay, fine." So we went into the tape editing room, and like I say, he'd had a couple of beers and his tape edits were all wonky and he'd cut the wrong place and there were words that were not making sense. And anyway, then he said, "Yeah, I think we might just leave it there for today." Good idea.
And that was your lesson. All right, let's talk about Stan. Now, I asked you earlier, was it slightly sexually harassing the way you first spoke to Stan? And you said, nah.
No, not at all. So I'm quite direct, and sometimes people are kind of shocked by that. But if I see someone walking by who looks great, I'll tell them. Anyway, I was sitting at Channel 7. I was working for the Games show, the Olympic show, ahead of Sydney 2000 Olympics. And I saw Stan. I'm not a big TV watcher because in South Africa, when I grew up, television was banned because the government didn't want the black majority knowing how the rest of the world was living. So TV has never really meant very much to me. So I didn't watch it, didn't really know people, but of course, there's signs everywhere, Stan Grant, because he was hosting the main show. And anyway, this guy came walking out of the canteen one day and I said to the producer I was with, "Is that Stan Grant?" And she goes, yeah, that's him. And Stan's he's always on a mission, so people just leave him alone. Anyway, as he started walking past with his sandwich for lunch, I said, "Oh, Stan." And this girl just went, "Oh no, I know what Tracey's going to do." I said, "We've just voted you the best looking person on Channel 7. And he's like, "Oh, thanks," and walked off. And she was like, "Oh, that is so embarrassing." I mean, I never had any idea that I would ever talk to Stan Grant again because our circles just didn't kind of overlap. Anyway, they did because Channel 7 decided they'd send both of us to ancient Olympia to cover the lighting of the torch. And I can tell you, the flame was well and truly lit.
I love that. You did have to sort of steal him away from his book occasionally, though.
Yeah, definitely. Stan travels with a bag, not with clothes or toiletries or anything like that. He goes on international flights. He's got this great big heavy shoulder bag with about 25 books in it that he's reading all at once, And so when he got to the airport for this trip, and I hadn't spoken to him since that lunchtime exchange, and he got to the airport and made sure he wasn't sitting anywhere near the rest of the Channel 7 crew because all he wanted to do was read his books. So at one layover somewhere, Rome, I think I went up to him and said, "What are you reading?" And we started having this conversation about all the books he was reading and then all the music he loves and all of this and all of that. And this is a conversation we are still having. We haven't got to the end of that conversation yet. So, yeah.
Oh, that is lovely. It wasn't all sort of honeymoon lovey, though. I don't remember this at the time, but you got paparazzi'd.
A lot. Chased off the road. Headlines in News Corp calling me the Holmes wrecker. Photos of me on the front page. They even ran a poll saying, "Do you support Tracey Holmes and Stan Grant living together?"
Relationship got polled. That's just...
Yeah, we actually knocked Tom and Nicole off the front page of some magazine. Anyway, my marriage has lasted longer than hers, so I feel very grateful.
And a much nicer guy, I think. All right. Now, there are so many sporting moments to talk about in your book. We're not going to get to all of them. But I thought particularly we've got the Matildas coming here in a couple of weeks, which is very exciting. Can I take you back first, though, to Sam Kerr?
Yep.
That extraordinary revelation, that messy revelation. How do you think that should have been handled? Because again, politics, psychology, power and people, and even just the phrase she used became a culture war in itself. What would be the ideal way, let's say the incident's happened, how do you deal with something like that?
Look, I think, many different ways and many different people could have responded differently. And like I said before, I'm pretty direct and people can sometimes misinterpret that. And I often don't say these things with a particular judgment or bias or personality clash, because that's almost irrelevant. So I just look at these things with the experiences I've seen and how I see national teams are viewed. First of all, how we view them, but then how they're viewed overseas. And so the role of a national captain, of any national captain, is much more than playing well on the field. It comes with a whole lot of other responsibility, and we know that. We've seen it in cricket with Sandpapergate, and we know what happened with Steve Smith, who's only now just sort of come back in and being able to captain the side again. And I think these things are important, because if those sorts of standards are not important anymore, then where do we go? I had a very good lesson when I was very young, in my early days at the ABC, and I turned up to work to do my radio shift. And I had an outfit on which, you could probably describe as skimpy. I was young at the time, was probably going out afterwards. And I remember I got a call from ABC News, TV News, and they said, look, our sports reporter's fallen over sick today. You need to go to the SCG and do an interview with Martin Crowe, who was captain of the cricket team at the time. And so I said, yeah, okay. So I rocked up to do this interview, and Martin Crowe stood there like that, not really looking at my eyes. And so when we got back to cut up the tape, my boss called me in and he said, look, wear whatever you like. He said, but generally speaking, we never know what we're going to have to do in a day. And you don't know if you're going to get called up tomorrow afternoon to fill in and go and do an interview with the Prime Minister of this country or any other country. So just think about that. And from that day on, I was always prepared to do an interview with the Prime Minister of this country or any other country, and made sure that I was kind of just respectfully dressed. And I think when you're talking about standards, that's not a bad thing. And so if you're the captain of a national team, people are viewing your country through your behaviour. And I think what happened with Sam on that terrible night, when she'd obviously been out celebrating 3 goals for Chelsea, excellent, had too much to drink, vomits in the back of a cab, refuses to pay the clean-up, gets into an argument, smashes the window, gets delivered to a police station, and then we all know what she said there. It's not a good look, especially since the Matildas were on such a high after the World Cup. So my thing was, I think Sam should have had advice, and she has advisors, and that advice should have been, the next day if you rock up, and she did go back to the police station, pay the fine for the taxi, and was a little bit more apologetic, but no public apology. I think if she did that and explained herself, most people would go, I get it. You had a big night out, that's terrible, you've apologised, excellent. But she didn't do that, and she never has done that. And I think when Football Australia, I think part of their mandate is thinking about how we are represented on the international stage. And Sam is a most phenomenal player. I can't take that away from her. She's phenomenal. She's come back for Chelsea. She's been scoring again this week. But for me, I thought, if I was in charge, and I often try and do this, put myself in the shoes of whoever, if I was running Football Australia, my conversation would have been, Sam, whatever, we're supporting you, we still want you to be part of the Matildas, but the captaincy's going elsewhere for now, while you deal with what you have to deal with, the court case and everything else. And they didn't do that, and I think that's because a variety of reasons, one of which, Sam Kerr delivers a lot of money and a lot of sponsorship, and I think they probably saw that if they did that, it would come at a financial cost. And I don't think that's how you should be making decisions when you're talking about national representation. Yeah.
And do you think, how much agency would Sam have had, or would she have just been told this is how we're doing it?
Oh no, Sam's got agency, don't worry about that.
Because of the money?
Yeah, Sam runs her own race and calls her own shots, you know, and good luck to her for that. I don't have a problem with people looking after themselves first, because what you learn about in sport a lot is that people promise loyalty, but it's never there, because the next minute when the next best person comes along, you're gone and there's no loyalty, you know. So I understand looking after number one first, but there's ways and means of doing that. And I just think that the whole situation was not handled as it should have been handled on multiple fronts. And also consider that this whole event had happened before the World Cup. So can you imagine if the news had broken during the World Cup, what that would have done to the team? How different the headlines would have been? You know, how different the whole kind of environment around the Matildas and how hugely successful that tournament was. And for Football Australia, it would have been a very, very different story. And she knew that, but she didn't tell anyone, she didn't forewarn anyone. And so when the news actually did break, like a year later, Football Australia was really kind of like a rabbit in the headlights, because they had no idea. Yeah.
Now, I have very selfishly asked you a lot of my own questions, but we also have some fabulous questions here from the audience, so thanks everyone who sent those in. What will it take for non-Indigenous Australians to recognise First Nations people's contributions beyond sport and entertainment, to routinely call out racism and to overcome systemic biases stemming from colonial times? Small question for you.
And you know, I don't have the answer for that. I don't think anyone has the answer for that. And, you know, this is part of... I always, you know, I like the way... I read a book many, many years ago when we first moved to China, and the book was called The Geography of Thought. So it's quite an old book now, but a lot of stuff that's in it is still really relevant. And it's about how different cultures actually think differently. So some cultures think in never-ending circles, basically. Western culture, we're kind of straight line. We're here and we've got to get to there. How are we going to do that? But the problem with that kind of thinking is that we keep seeing destination points, and there's no such thing. There's just evolution. Things just continue to evolve. So as soon as you get there, everything, the environment around you has changed. So what you imagined back then, you're operating in a completely different scenario now. And so I think with these sorts of questions, I think it's important we ask them. And I think it's really important that we wrestle with them. But I also think it's okay not to have the answer today, and not to expect everyone to come to the same point of understanding at the same time. It's never going to happen. But you talk to people, again, you know, the same as there's a lot more women in sport now, in sports journalism and sports reporting, and we actually celebrate our women's team. So that has changed hugely. Is there still a long way to go? Yes. But you can celebrate the gains while still recognising the challenges. And I think with racism, we've got the same thing. Actually, a report came out from Sport Integrity Australia just this week. And they interviewed 1,200 players and coaches in Australian sport across about 64 different sports. And from what they got back was that 90% of athletes and coaches think that their sport is a safe and welcoming place for everyone who is in that sport. So the number of people who actually reported issues was a lot lower than many of us might think, given the negative stories we hear about sport all the time. And I think the percentage they got back, just based on racism, was that 4%, I think, said that they had suffered racism. And what was nice about that was that there was more than 20% of people that said they had seen racist behaviour. So it means there's a lot more people who are recognising it and calling it out, hopefully, and a lot less people experiencing it.
I feel like those stats are better than outside sport.
Exactly. And sport gets such a bad rap sometimes, but I went back, when I saw these stats, I thought that's interesting, because I went and had a look at all the stories that have been done in various websites, news sites around the country, and it was like, sport rife with racism. It's like, no, it's not. And, bullying, the hidden agenda in sport. It's like, that's not true. That is just not true, according to the results of this survey. And it's a rolling survey over 5 years. This is the first one, so it'll be interesting to follow. And then I went back and I thought, okay, what about bullying in the workplace, just generally? And I found something, I think it came from this university actually, that said it was upwards of 10% of people in the workplace had suffered bullying. And on a rank against 31 European countries, Australia's number 6 for having the worst bullying culture in the workplace. And so sport is better than that. And the other thing, this comes back to the silo effect. Sport doesn't operate with a whole lot of people who are just trapped in sport world. People who play sport, govern sport, referee sport, they come from our society. And so, of course, there's going to be the same sorts of challenges that we see out here, played out here, but at least in this environment, people have to go through, regular, annual education programs, training updates. They talk about racism, they confront it head on. So, yeah, sport actually does a whole lot of good work that we often don't recognise.
Yeah. And look, while we're sort of on the media, there's another great question here, and I might add my own twist. So the question is, do transgender athletes have a place in women's sport, or is there often too much of a physical advantage for this to be fair to other competitors? Now, that is a tricky question, but I might twist it a little bit into, obviously it's quite timely, how has the reporting on this issue been?
Very good. The reporting's not very good. It's a complex scenario. But I've been interviewing transgender people who play sport since the mid-1990s. So I know a lot of them in Australia and I know a few of them overseas. And when I say a lot of them, seriously, there's just not very many. So when you hear about this massive problem in sport, it doesn't really exist. It's a fantastic media story because media just thinks, we can go to town on this because everyone's got like an emotional response or an ideological response or whatever. But the first place to start is that we're talking about people. So let's start with that and the respect that all people deserve. Secondly, you speak to the experts who work with them and the athletes themselves and what they go through as they transition and what that means to their capabilities. So Kristen Worley is a Canadian cyclist who did a lot of work in this area. She actually took the International Olympic Committee to court back in, the 2010s, early 2010s, and had a partial victory. And the story that she often tells in trying to explain it to people who've never met a transgender person, let alone a transgender athlete, who is trying to compete in elite sport. She says what happens is basically week by week, you might have, a four-wheel drive and your engine inside, your ability to power this four-wheel drive, you're trying to run on a lawnmower engine, with two-stroke, because your body's ability to absorb oxygen in the same way, to power the size of your frame, it just disintegrates. And so a lot of people might have heard of Laurel Hubbard, who was the New Zealand weightlifter who competed in Tokyo. And actually, I've been covering the Olympics since Barcelona 1992. So far, she is the only transgender woman ever to have competed at the Olympics. So this idea that they're just running over, taking all these spots for women is just not real. Laurel Hubbard, when she competed at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in 2018, she went to lift a weight, and as she went to lift it, her elbow dislocated, and it was awful and very painful. And I had a call from Kristen Worley that night because she'd been watching it on television, and she said, "Tracey, this is what happens. Your body just starts to disintegrate and it can't handle what it once was. And it gradually gets worse. It never gets better. It's like going into a spontaneous menopause when you're however old you are, when you go through the transition. So a lot of the reporting never covers those sorts of things. And I think that's really important. The other thing is the reporting always goes back to, and we saw it this week, images of the Algerian boxer from the last Olympics in Paris, Iman Khalif, and the South African runner, Caster Semenya, both of whom are gold medalists, neither of whom are transgender. And they just get whacked into this really horrible, negative, clickbait coverage all the time. And it's a total misrepresentation. So they have something very different. They are what's called DSD, differences of sex development. And, there's any number of people that are born into any population on any given day that have these variations. And often, they pop out and the doctor says, congratulations, you've got a baby girl. And then at time of puberty, their bodies start to change. And they had no idea that this was happening inside their body. And again, the variations are so vast. There are some who become very masculine. There are others who have no impact whatsoever. But most of them don't know they have this condition until they start seeing, feeling, experiencing changes within their body. And so that's a different discussion altogether.
I've had much more sympathy for sports people after reading your book and talking to you, Tracey. Now, we are coming to the end of our time. I thought I'd try and end on maybe a simpler, a bit of a joyful note. There are so many moments and interviews, and I realise it's a bit like asking you to choose your favourite child, but do you have a favourite sporting moment or a favourite interview or a favourite story throughout your complicated and illustrious career?
I have got so many, and it depends what time of day when you ask me, how many coffees I've had, what I've been thinking about, to locate me in different places and different times. And sometimes people remind me, oh, what about that? And I go, oh, yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that. But I'll tell you a story about here, actually, and I don't think I've got it in the book because I'd forgotten about it. But I used to come and cover the Formula One Grand Prix. I had a really funny experience getting into Formula One. I always thought it was good, but I had no experience with it. My sister, Jodie, was a professional surfer, and she was competing in Portugal way back. I just started at the ABC, and I used to carry my little handy cam around to, record any interviews in case I bumped into people. Anyway, on this day in Portugal, there was no surf, so it was a lay day. So I was reading the local paper, and I was like, oh, the Formula One Grand Prix on here. Fantastic. I'm going to get media tickets. Like, yeah, right. Anyway, I rocked up to the venue and I said, hi, my name's Tracey Holmes. I've come from Australia. I work for the ABC and I'm here to get my media pass for myself and my camera person, who was going to be my sister. And they went, no, sorry, we don't have you on the list. There's no accreditation for you. I said, I've come all the way from Australia. I'm not going to leave until I get my accreditation, because do you think I can ring my boss and say, I'm just going to head home because I can't get in? And they didn't know what to do because I just sat there. Finally, a guy came out who was in charge of all the media for around the world, and he goes, who are you? What do you want? Come into my office. So I explained the situation. He pulled out his drawer, pulled out 2 passes. I thought, you beauty. Anyway, he takes a permanent marker and he crosses off, no access to pit lane, no access here, no access there. And I thought, I don't care, we've got a pass to get in, that's great. So I was on the bus going back to my sister's accommodation and I was taking my nail polish off, and some of the nail polish remover slipped onto the pass, wiped off the permanent marker. I had access everywhere. And so my sister and I rocked up to the Grand Prix, pretending we were locals. And the first van I went up to was the McLaren van, and at the time, Ayrton Senna was the driver, Gerhard Berger was the driver. I was like, oh, excuse me, I'm from the ABC Australia. Can we do an interview with Ayrton Senna? They went, yeah, come back in 25 minutes when he's finished lunch. I was like, oh, my God. So we did, and my sister's got this little camera, and she's, she's never taken photos in her life, but it was very funny. When I got back to Australia and I said to my boss, I've got interviews with Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger, they were like, Holmesy, how'd you do that? So then I suggested, well, why don't we do Grandstand from the Adelaide Formula One Grand Prix every year, which we did. And I had some of the best times here in Adelaide. Anyway, one year, Gerhard Berger says to me, look, there's a group of about 12 of us going to dinner. Would you like to come? So I said, yeah, sure. So I met them at this little Italian restaurant somewhere in town. Everyone's sitting around having a lovely chat. And there's a bloke opposite me, and he says, you know, I really like your ring. I said, oh, thanks. Where'd you get it? I said, oh, I don't know. I think I got it in Bali for about $4, like nothing flash. Anyway, 15 minutes later, he goes, I really like your earrings. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I got those wherever. Then I said to Gerhard, is this guy a jeweller? And I've got one of those voices that even when I whisper, you can hear me at the back of the room. The whole table stopped talking. And everyone was looking at me, and he looked at me, and he said, have you heard of the Beatles? I said, yes. He said, have you heard of, can't remember his name now, guitarist that lived up in Queensland part-time? And I went, yes, it was him. It was, someone tell me the name. Who's the... Thank you. See, I really did not know who he was. Anyway, George looked at me like, this chick's pulling my leg, and he looked quite angry, like, who does she think she is? Everyone knows who I am. Then I think he realised 10 minutes later, I really had no idea who he was, and I became his best friend for that weekend at the Grand Prix because he met the only person on the planet that didn't come with any sort of preconceived ideas or, you know, want to butter him up or just talk endlessly about the Beatles. And so every time I saw him at the track, it's like, oh, have you seen that? And have you been there? And have you done that? And so I've got really fond memories of the Adelaide Grand Prix. Thank you, Adelaide. Thank you, Mal Himmeling.
That is an absolute cracker. Thank you so much, Tracey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a fun evening and incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Tori. Was it Rigoni's Italian restaurant?
Might have been.
In Lee Street? I reckon it would have been.
I can't remember George Harrison's name.
Yeah, I can remember the restaurant.
Probably wasn't Italian at all. I've got a feeling it was. Malfi? No. I reckon it... I'm going for Rigoni's back in the day.
I reckon Latrat.
Anyway. Oh, yeah. I reckon it was Trap. Yeah, okay. Right, okay, focus. Thank you again. It's been wonderful to have you here. Now, Tracey's book is available in the foyer and she'll be out there to sign. So please go out and buy a lovely book and read it.
And there's still lots in there that you haven't heard here tonight.
Yeah, a lot.
Oh, there's so much.
So much.
So much.
Now, we've got one event left this year. I can't believe this year's gone flying so quickly, and it's with Sean Kelly, and if you haven't booked in already, please do so. It's going to be a fascinating event, talking about and analysing the Labor government. Just saying, with Albo, there you go, there he is, with Misha Kachel from The Conversation, so that will be a fascinating conversation. And in December, a newsletter will be coming out with some highlights for next year, so please watch out for those. We've got some great events coming up next year as well, so, and hopefully may they continue for many years to come. So thank you again, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.